And yes, they do not have snowplows in Tokyo. They use water to blow away the snow. Um, Thank you very much for the opportunity to share these points and speak on peace and security in terms of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. I'd like to frame my comments in terms of three particular areas. One is contradiction, two is IPS priorities, and three, minilateral engagement. In terms of contradictions, I would like to just outline the many contradictions that I think the current government has been engaged in terms of how we are thinking about peace and security in Indo-Pacific and resources. Of course, in 2022, the Trudeau government released its long-awaited Indo-Pacific strategy, promising at least 2.3 billion Canadian dollars over 5 years to implement the strategy. That announcement came at the same time as our National Defense Minister, Anita Anand, promised Canada would spend $4.9 billion on modernizing our North American air defense. At the same time, our government committed funds to its objectives in Europe, including $2.6 billion to renew and expand Operation Reassurance, part of NATO's defense and deterrence measures in Eastern Europe. Of course, at the same time, we had an announcement about defense cutbacks, including defense. These contradictory positions raise inconvenient questions of how Canada is going to sustain its foreign and defense policy within the Indo-Pacific while resources are being diminished across the board or being deployed in Ukraine. How do we meet our priorities within the Indo-Pacific? Both foreign policy and defense policy really are being challenged. And I think that these contradictory positions are raising serious concern amongst our allies and partners about where Canada sits in the Indo-Pacific, what kind of resources are going to be deployed in the Indo-Pacific, and can we engage in a sustained, meaningful, and fruitful diplomacy. My second point has to do with Indo-Pacific priorities. And here again, I think that, quite frankly, we've spread the peanut butter way too thin in terms of how we are engaging in the Indo-Pacific. What should be Canada's defense priorities within foreign policy and defense policies within the region? And here, I particularly advocate for limiting or pulling back our Indo-Pacific engagement from the Western Indian Ocean and primarily focus on the South China Sea, the East China Sea, as well as the Pacific Ocean. And again, these are critical for Canada in that they have sea lines of communication that vary about 4.5 trillion US dollars of trade through the South China Sea and in and around Taiwan and the East China Sea. The major economies within the region, whether it's South Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan, and the Southeast Asian countries, really are the bedrock or the most important players for Canada. And we need to make sure that the sea lines of communication remain secure, stable, and that Canada can engage freely within the region. Second, and I think important, is stable supply chains, in particular semiconductor supply chains, and this does revolve around the cross-strait relations. We need to find critical ways to foster peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits to ensure that those semiconductors can continue to be exported to Canada, that employ Canadians. North Korea also is a particular actor that I think we need to find ways to work with, and I'm going to come back into that as North Korea continues to produce weapons of mass destruction, both in terms of quantity and quality. A sixth area I'll focus on, of course, is China. And this is the Canada-China Committee. And we are, I think, on the same page of the book that China is interested in reshaping the region's security environment, security architecture, and how rules are being promoted within the region. We have a deep-seated interest in a rules-based order within the region. We have a deep-seated interest in pushing back against disinformation and other tactics to reshape the region that will be unfavorable to Canadian interests, including trade, including supporting our key partners like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and others. What are the key tools for engagement? Here I'm advocating for minilateral partnerships. This doesn't eschew multilateral partnerships, but much more focused, functional partnerships with 4 or 5 other like-minded countries to deal with specific issues that will enable Canada to add meaningful value within the region. A good example, of course, is plugging into the quadrilateral security dialogue. Plugging in means that we, on an ad hoc basis, plug into the quadrilateral security dialogues maritime exercises, perhaps search and rescue exercises, humanitarian and disaster and assistance relief exercises to add value considering our limited resources. Another good example is plugging into the AUKUS agreement. I think the nuclear submarine part of the AUKUS agreement is distant from Canadian interests, but the AI and quantum computing components of the AUKUS agreement are clear areas where Canada can contribute, considering we've already secured budget for these cooperation in these areas.
Professor Nagy, sorry, sir, you've gone over the 5 minutes. Do you care to just wrap up quickly here so we'll get to the questioning?
Yes, I'll finish up on one point. New mini-laterals focusing on core areas that I think are of interest to Canada, and that is disinformation. An interesting combination could be working with Taiwan, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and the US to focus on disinformation, identification, and combating this within the region. And lastly, working in mini-lateral cooperation in the Pacific Islands on environmental issues and perhaps Indigenous issues as well. Thank you.
And thank you.